Good morning, everybody. We're here today to try and answer the question, can Centre-Loire wines remain crisp and fresh in a changing climate? Something tells me that the answer is going to be yes, but we're going to explore that through 4 different wines, all from the Centre-Loire. Let me first introduce my speakers and fellow tasters. Arnaud Bourgeois is the co-president of BIVC.
Good morning, everybody.
Bureau interprofessionnel des vins du centre. François Dalle is a SICAVAC viticulturalist.
Good morning.
Jamie Good is a British author and wine writer. Tamlin Curran is sustainability editor at gr.com and staff writer. And Henri Chapon is now a hospitality consultant after a long career in the British on-trade. So without further ado, Arnaud, I'm going to start with the obvious question. Why is it important that Centre-Loire wine should remain crisp and fresh?
Well, I believe that in the Centre-Loire, we are expecting Sauvignon Blanc to be with a good freshness, with a crispiness, thanks to the level of acidity and the balance that we have in those wines. And it's part of the personality that Centre-Loire wine offers this crispiness. So it's important that they stay crisp because it's an identity, easily recognizable. It's a DNA, I would say, of the Sauvignon Blanc from Centre-Loire. We would say that there is a certain purity in the Sauvignon Blanc of the region of Centre-Loire. This purity, I think, comes from the style of expression that we have of the Sauvignon Blanc, together with the minerality, which is quite expressed, well expressed in those wines.
Okay, so we have purity, we have minerality. Henri, would you agree that from the consumer point of view, in your experience when you were talking to consumer, is that the way that they perceive Centre-Loire wines?
Yes, definitely. The wine from the Centre-Loire in the on-trade are really the wine that people will be looking for when they look for something fresh, refreshing. I would say kind of like on the easier way of drinking compared to some of the big Chardonnays and things like that. And it's quite interesting because not everybody especially realize within the consumers that it's a Sauvignon based, but they just, they just like the style and they would kind of like, refer it, I would say like things like Sancerre and Pouilly-Fumé are still amongst the biggest sales in the on-trade for, when you got a restaurant. If you got those wine on your list, they will be definitely the one that are going the most with Chablis.
And you say that the consumers are not always aware that these are Sauvignon wines.
No, people are not always aware. And when sometime they realize that it's the same grape variety that you can find in other country, then they're interested in trying those other country like New Zealand or South Africa. But for them, Sancerre and Pouilly-Fumé are really kind of like two of the I won't say the easy wine, but kind of like pleasing wine.
Yeah.
When you want something, you want to make sure that you drink something that is pleasing and you've got no bad surprise. Sancerre is a big winner on that, on generally the wine from the area.
Okay. As we say in French, une valeur sûre.
Exactly. Then after it's a question of budget. If they can't afford Sancerre, they will go for one of the other appellations of the area.
Okay. Tamlin, if I say to you Centre-Loire wines, what does that bring to mind in organoleptic terms?
I think for me, perhaps primarily, it's about structure. So we're talking elegance, cool climate elegance, restraint, beautifully food-friendly wines that don't overpower. And I think this is probably the difference between, say, a New World Sauvignon Blanc, which tend to be quite loud and brash and bold. These have got beautiful grace and restraint. So they have distinct identity, as you were saying, but it's held back. So they're food friendly because they don't overpower the food, but they still retain their character.
Okay, and they can also be drunk on their own.
Absolutely, vin de soif.
Excellent. Jamie, you're one of the most well-traveled wine writers, if not the most well-traveled wine writer. You've also lived in New Zealand for a while, and we can't ignore the fact that New Zealand is also home to Sauvignon Blanc. What, in your opinion, makes Centre-Loire Sauvignon so distinctive?
I think the first thing would be to say that it's the New Zealand focus is primarily on Sauvignon Blanc, which they've helped to make famous, where when you come to the Centre-Loire, it's about place. And this is the strength of the Centre-Loire, is it's not saying we're Sauvignon Blanc, because that's great, but there's a ceiling in terms of price for a varietally labelled Sauvignon Blanc. Yeah. Whereas if you're making a wine of place, no one can copy that. And there's necessarily no price ceiling as well. And I think the really wonderful thing about the Centre-Loire is the soils. And if you bring a New World winemaker who's been working really hard with a limited palette of soils to work with to somewhere like the Centre-Loire, they're just going to wet themselves, because this is like, when I remember the first time I went to the Centre-Loire, I was going, oh my word, this is like amazing vineyard site after amazing vineyard site. And amazing vineyard sites being used to make some quite low-priced wines. And I think that this is just a treasure trove of resources. This is a very rare in the world of wine that you get this palette of soil types with this underlying theme of limestone, which is fantastic and is relatively underexploited. I think at the moment there's so much potential. I think it's a very exciting place.
So when you say underexploited, that calls for another question. What do you mean by that? How could it be more exploited?
I think it was touched on earlier. People have heard of Sancerre, they've probably heard of Puy-Fumé, but the other appellations are relatively under the radar, but they've got fantastic soils as well. This is the thing. And it's because in the past the market wasn't going to pay 30 euros for a Cottage Genois, and it's now the market will pay that if it's good. The market for wines has, in terms of people's ability to pay for them, for obviously this is not everyone, but people will pay a lot of money for really good wines, and they're much more open-minded now. They don't think it has to be Sancerre. And in fact, a lot of people will say, well, let's go to the other places and see, because Sancerre is so famous that there's a premium that comes from being famous. Yeah. And let's go and explore these beautiful expressions of terroir. And that's why they're underappreciated, I think, in the past. But now I think the market conditions are that if you can find a route to market, and this is the key thing for selling wine anyway, and you can make something compelling, you can get rewarded for that. In the past, people weren't going to pay more than a certain amount for these other appellations because they weren't famous. So that restricted the ambitions of the wine grower. So I think now there's a real opportunity.
What do you think about that, Henri?
I would definitely agree with that. I mean, first because I think there is no choice, because the more it goes, the more some of the other appellations are becoming more expensive, especially Mentou, which is the closest. Yeah, and it seems to me that the further you go from the Loire, the river, the less expensive it goes. Yes, I think there are definitely other styles to discover in the area. How am I going to say that? The thing is really how to market that. How is the public really understand that? For the moment, what I can tell you from my experience in the on-trade is that the other appellations like Mentou, Quincy-Roilly are sold on the back of, it's not far from Sancerre, it's same style, it's a little bit lighter, it's a little bit less, probably less minerality, more fruit-driven, but that's kind of like, how it sells, basically. There's no, for the moment, to my experience, there's no kind of like understanding that it's all coming from the same area.
Okay.
Yes? Okay. But as Jamie said, I think it's very good, because the fact that people don't know it is Sauvignon really sells the wine from the area. Otherwise, you become another Sauvignon. Yeah. And I think it's nice. I like the Sauvignon. I'm not from the Sancerre. I'm from a little bit further west where we make only Sauvignon type of thing. But so I love the Sauvignon. But the idea really is that you are selling it under the name of the appellation, under the name of the area, and that makes it a little bit, as I was saying earlier on. I don't want to advertise for anybody else, but like Chablis, people, they don't know it's Chardonnay, they don't care it's Chardonnay, they know the style, and that's the same thing for Sancerre and Pouilly.
Okay. So, François, we've established that we have something quite unique. We have a very specific profile of wine, but climate change is a reality. It's happening. And what I'd like you to explain to us is how it's affecting, how it's potentially changing the profile of the wines of Centre-Loire.
I think the best maturity of the grapes is when the maturity is with very short days, cold days, to preserve aromas. And more the climate is hot, more the harvest is soon, and it's more difficult to have the very low maturation.
Okay.
So we make a lot of experiments to try to understand how we can change that, how we can preserve our aromas. And we made a lot of experiments. Then we made a big statistical analysis, and we observed that the first parameter that influence to the aromas and the freshness is the terroir.
Yeah.
So we can do some things, we have some tools, but the main tool is our terroir, and we can't change it. So it's a good thing for us.
So what you're saying is that there are measures you can put in place, but the best protection you have is what you have in your DNA, your terroir.
Yeah, because we observe on these warm years that we preserve some freshness. We'll test it
Okay.
now, I hope.
Well, since we've been talking a lot but not tasting much, let's get tasting. So this is the Pouilly Fumé. I'm going to put you on the spot. Tamlin, you once wrote, and I love that the shape of the wine matters as much as the flavors. And that really resonated with me, because many a time I've tasted a wine and yes, you go, okay, grapefruit, lemon, blah, blah, blah. But then sometimes it's like music. The wine just fills your mouth in a perfect way. And you think this wine is just right. And so I'm going to ask you to describe this wine to us.
You're quite right. I used shapes to describe wine, partly for two reasons. Partly because I believe that one of the most powerful storytelling tools is metaphor, and it's been used for thousands of years. So one way to describe a wine is metaphorically. But the other thing, which is where I often go to shape, is that shape describes the structure of the wine in the mouth, which is very often, particularly with white wines, related to acidity and freshness. And it's how the wine starts in the mouth and where it finishes. So, and I know I haven't tasted this now, but I tasted it earlier. And this Pouilly Fumé, for me, is very triangular. It has a beautiful width at the back of the mouth, where it just fills the back of your mouth with freshness and this energy, and all the flavors are there. But then it finishes in this fine, aciculate, needle-like point. So for me, this is a beautiful triangle with a wide flare of flavors at the back, and then this neat, linear, precise finish.
Precise. I'm so glad you used that word, because I had that literally at the tip of my tongue. Jamie, what would you add to this beautiful description?
It's very hard to add, because I think what Tamlin's one of the things she's doing so well is she's describing the wine in a holistic way. So I think that one of the things I think is the wine as a whole, and so often we're taught in education about wines to take a reductionist approach, break it into little components.
Yeah.
But that never really captures the essence of what the wine is. So I love these different ways of thinking about wine, almost stepping out of, because what we have in our brain, I know this isn't a direct answer to your question, but we have all these pegs that we hang all these descriptors on, you know. So we first of all, we prototype the wine. We say, this is Sauvignon Blanc, or this is Pouilly Fumé. And then we go to the list of words that we have learnt to associate, and we say, is it this one? Oh, well, I'll just take any 4 of those words and put them into my tasting note. And sometimes we forget to dwell in what is in the glass. You know, the words get in the way of the actual
Yeah.
perception. So I'm kind of, I find with this wine, I think certainly the key thing for me is that sense of brightness and transparency. It's very linear. And then technically, obviously, Sauvignon, I'm thinking, is there green there? Is there some sort of green character? Because green is often an intrinsic part of Sauvignon,
Yeah.
I think. And I think there is a little bit of green there, which I think I really like, and I think this is one of the things. But then you've got this tension and precision and a sense of focus. And it's a very distinctive style. I think it's really good.
Excellent. So we've got precision twice. Henri, you bring to this panel a slightly different take because you both have the British experience and the French experience. So putting on your French hat, how would you describe this wine?
How would I describe this wine? I mean, I would. You mean kind of like technically, or just
Whatever you want.
whatever? I mean, that's what people they would call in France a wine with lots of minerality, and I always find minerality difficult to explain because for me, if you say mineral, it means it smells or it tastes of stone of some sort. And then in France, it's it means more something that is very refreshing. We have a quite high level of acidity. So in English, we would say refreshing, crisp. And then in France, we would say mineralité. That is basically that thing, which is kind of like being hard, being structured without being harsh. Yes, that's
It's
kind of like
interesting that you see the minerality and freshness as
the same.
Okay.
Because in France you don't kind of like pick up on the refreshing thing. You pick up on the hardness of the acidity.
okay.
So that's why you use that kind of like more minerality type of thing. Yes, I mean that's basically as it is, and that is something that and also one thing, and also minerality as well refers to a wine that is usually quite well marked by its terroir, so the area where it's coming from. So a wine with minerality will be the opposite of a very fruity wine. So if you take, for example, a Sauvignon Blanc from the Touraine area, where it's basically all on the fruit, you will have lots of you will have lots of fruit in it because it will be fruit driven. Rather than here in Sancerre and in Pouilly, the area, the terroir will bring more complexity into the wine, and that kind of like typicity of the area where the Sauvignon Blanc is growing is taking over the fruit character. And that happens to me. Again, don't want to make any advertising for anybody else, but that happens to me, for example, with the Gewürztraminer in Alsace. If you've got just a simple Gewürztraminer, it's just all fruit. And then if you take a Grand Cru Gewürztraminer, then it's not as fruity, as exuberant as just a simple Gewürztraminer, because the terroir, the area is marking the wine, is signing off its capacity, its
gives
power.
it added value.
Yes, exactly. And that's what we've got really with the Sauvignon Blanc in this area.
Okay, so we've established that this is a superlative wine. It's got precision, it's got acidity, it's got freshness. So, François, 2020 was quite warm vintage. How did the grower manage to achieve that level of acidity and freshness in such a warm year?
That level is very surprising for 2020. He has the enormous chance to be in the north of Pouilly-Fumé in a cold area that permit to preserve it. But he managed a lot of things on the canopy, on the vigor of the vines. And what is very difficult and very important is the date of the harvest. More the year is warm, more we have to be precise on that day. When the harvest is very late, we have perhaps 1 week to harvest. When it's very hot, we have only 1 or 2 days to have the good balance. So he had to be very precise on that point.
Okay, so date of harvest, working on the canopy.
Yeah.
What does the British science man say on that?
No, that's this is obviously things to do, but I think canopy is very interesting because I think that there are lots of things that can be done. viticulturally, I think that are quite interesting in terms of when you've got a warm season. I mean, lots of warm areas have been, where they've been getting warmer and warmer, have tried things like kaolin, application. I don't know if this happened in the Centre-Loire, because that reduces the leaf temperature and it reflects sun away.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's obviously more long-term things, and like vine material and rootstocks, because rootstocks is one area that's really been under-researched. There's only been a couple of rootstocks that have been added since the early, the early 20th century. It was a furcull and gravisac, the only two that have really come along. And I think that rootstock is the low-hanging fruit, because if you change the rootstocks and develop rootstocks that are better suited to, the climate that we've got today, you can still keep your grape varieties.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing is what New Zealand are doing at the moment is really interesting. So what they're doing is what I kind of dub as accelerated clonal selection. So they're doing, the idea is that a lot of clonal differences in Sauvignon Blanc, or any variety, a lot of the clonal differences are to do with these genetic elements called transposable elements. And what they've found is that when they do somatic cell embryogenesis, so this is you're basically taking, it's a little complex to explain, but you're recreating vines from somatic cell embryogenesis, where you're getting the tissue differentiating and then redifferentiating. And what they find is that they've got this big project now where they're doing this. They're creating 12,000 clones effectively, and then using marker-assisted selection to select from those clones, what they think have got suitable, so rather than just going and just looking at what clones are existing there, they're actually accelerating this clonal selection in the laboratory, then using DNA sequencing and also looking at epigenetic changes to see which of these, rapidly screen through their 12,000 new clones that they're going to create, to then kind of find things that are going to be, Sauvignon Blanc that will be useful for the future, because they're facing many of the similar challenges, and obviously New Zealand as well. There's many similar challenges in Marlborough that there are in the Centre-Loire in terms of climate chaos and unpredictable weather patterns. There's lots of traits that you'd like to bring into Sauvignon for the vineyard of the future. So I think that's obviously a bit more long term, but these things, there's lots that can be done to preserve what is there. The terroir is there, but it's that changing the vine material potentially could have some very interesting.
The Sikavag did quite a lot of work on massal selection, didn't you?
Yeah, even on rootstock massal selection. Yeah.
So what's your view on this rootstock project? Sorry, this wasn't planned, but I think this is an interesting thing to pick on.
What Jamie said was he's totally right, but it's particularly right on very young wine, very young vines. And we observed another very important parameter is the age of the plant.
Yeah.
And older the vine is, better the balance, keep the balance. So this work on the rootstock will be very, very pertinent in 30 or 40 years, perhaps. So when we have very old vines, we can preserve a lot of things with the old rootstock.
Okay. So what was your experience, Arnaud, from a grower's perspective? What was your experience of the 2020 vintage?
Well, first of all, that was the year of the COVID. That was, but besides that, it was a hot vintage. We had, well, first of all, we had a mild winter and a rainy winter. Usually when they are mild, they are rainy. And after that, the bud break happened beginning of April, which is about a week earlier than the normal vintage. And then we had flowering time at the end of May, which is 2 weeks earlier than. So we knew that it's going to be an early vintage, and we started actually to pick the fruit end of August, which was at least at our winery, but most of my colleagues started their harvest end of August, which is unusual, obviously. So the solutions to make sure that we're going to preserve the style of our Sauvignon Blanc. First of all, we pick the fruit early morning. We wanted to prevent from too much phenolic aspect in the wines. The second thing is we know that the end of the pressing offers always a juice which is lower in acidity and higher in pH. So we separate the end of the press. pressing,
Okay.
which is always good because then we can have a good balance for 2/3, even 3/4 of the juice extracted.
Okay.
Then we also tend not to have a long lees aging in order to avoid to have too much body, I mean too much opulence, which might give a little bit of heaviness
Yeah.
to the wines. And the other thing, we use more and more natural yeast, and natural yeast, they don't have the same performance in terms of sugar to alcohol, the way that they transform sugar to alcohol,
Yeah.
which helps to have lower level of alcohol. So
Okay.
that was more or less what we tried to do in our case. Of course, we hear what Jamie said and what our friend said for the plants, but immediately what we have to do is definitely to interfere on the fruits.
Okay. But it worked, which is the most important
Yeah,
thing.
exactly. Yeah, it helps.
So we're now going to taste the Coteau du Giennois. I apologize for the random order. It's not really very technical, but it serves a purpose. I must admit, I have a great fondness for Coteau du Giennois. I shiver when I hear Jamie talk about Coteau du Giennois that could cost 30 euros and more. I don't really want that to happen for purely selfish reason. There is a wine which we sent to a British journalist last year, which is a Coteau du Giennois sold at Sainsbury's, and that was incredibly popular because it's very affordable, but it's also an incredibly easy wine to taste. And I think if I had to give personality to different wines of the Centre-Loire, Pouilly-Fumé is the sharp one, beautiful but sometimes borderline uncomfortable. Quincy is the funky one. Coteau du Giennois is the friend. It's a lovely one. Sancerre is like Rondam, it's very elegant, but I like to think of Coteau du Giennois as the friend we all want to have. So, Tamlin, I'm trying really to go towards you now, using personalities rather than shape. So how would you describe this wine?
To me, this wine is like a tap dance in the mouth. It's just, it's got so much energy. This wine is dancing with energy. It's good, but it's wiry. It's kind of, you're talking about a slim, muscular, full of like a tap dancer. That's
Excellent.
what this wine is for me.
A tap dancer with a sense of humor.
It's buzzing with energy. It's fun. It just makes you feel happy to have it in your mouth.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jamie, what would you say about this wine?
For me, this is all about texture, and there's a volume in the mid palate I really appreciate, and then it's kind of framed by this really nice crystalline, citrus, spicy sort of framing. So it's almost like there's volume in the middle, some weight, but then there's this really nice detail that brings it holds your attention. It's not just about the simple fruit. So I think I really like it. Yeah.
It's a lovely wine. Francois, you described to us the measures that were taken in 2020 to make sure that Pouilly-Fumé retained its freshness. Would that be exactly the same measure in Coteau du Giennois, or does the difference in terroir makes a difference in terms of protective measure?
No, the measures are the same. It depends not on Coteau du Giennois or Pouilly or Sancerre, but it depends on each block. We have
Okay.
to adapt each block with its particularity to have this purpose, to keep this freshness in the wines.
Okay, so you would have different picking dates for the different blocks.
Different picking days, different way of managing the canopy, different way we use the different tools differently, dependently to the terroir.
Okay. The BVC has recently implemented a new environmental charter for Centre-Loire wines. This was a huge body of work and obviously something which is very important for the future. I've often heard that the benefits of an ecological investment doesn't just affect your carbon footprint, but it also affects the taste of the wine. It actually ends up in better wines often. So would you emphasize with that description?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, it's been a big job that we have been doing with all the producers of the Centre-Loire to create this charter, and it's a collective initiative. And I think it's unique in France, I believe, to create such a charter. So this charter is based on the environmental value, well, the high value environmental. It's interesting basis because we implemented different layers on top of that to have even more criterions, more complex. What we aim to do is to have 100% of the surface of the Centre-Loire vineyard certified in 2030.
So you give yourself
HVE.
7 years
Yeah, to have
to cover the whole.
the Centre-Loire. That's a goal. And
Yeah.
okay. So now to answer your question is we know that by working the soils, giving more chance to the soils to have more life, to have more biological activity,
Yeah.
it definitely affects and brings more vibrancy to the wine. And it brings another dimension to the wines. And we need that in our wines because I think we have two big faces in our wines in Centre-Loire. We have the fruity character and we have the mineral character. And the mineral character is probably pushed by the life that we have in our soil because it helps to have a better acidity, and acidity is a wonderful supporter of the minerality. So that's why it's so important to work the soils and to respect as much as possible environment for this reason.
Okay. I'm not sure who I'm going to go to next. It's either Tamlin or you're scribbling, so I'm going to go to Jamie. Jamie, would you agree that when this charter is implemented and more generally when there is an investment that's done, I mean, I'm not going to say in regenerative viticulture, but I could. How does that affect the taste of the wines?
Well, I think there's a growing realization, that a vineyard is an agro-ecosystem. You can't just have vines growing in a vineyard and nothing else and expect this to be, first of all, sustainable, because it's not, and secondly, for things to work properly. And we're realizing that the complexity of the interactions that are taking place below the soil, below the surface of the soil. And so soil microlife is very important. How you achieve that depends on where you are, what the conditions are. There's no template. And this is the thing about regenerative approaches. It's been talked about a lot. But my worry is that people will do what they did with biodynamics and come up with a recipe and a set of rules that you have to follow. And the thing is with vineyards is that, the best way to run a vineyard depends on where you are, what your climate conditions are like. And the best way to run a vineyard in the Mediterranean area is very different from, say, the Centre-Loire or the UK or any, every place has its own challenges and its own climatic influences that mean that really what you've got to look at is the results rather than the process. And the results are we need more life in the soils, more soil microlife, higher, once you start having higher soil organic material, for instance, your water holding capacity of the soils is improved. When you have things growing in the soil, you have more soil organic material. When you have things growing in the soil, you have better infiltration ability when it does actually rain. You don't get erosion and runoff. So all these things kind of work together. It's almost like a toolkit of approaches. And I think, how does it affect the flavor of the wine? I think once you start having vines that are, where you have to do fewer inputs because your ecosystem services are working well, then suddenly you'll find you get better balance in the vines. You'll find you're not fighting, you're not fighting yourself effectively, and then I think the potential is, to have more resilience in the vineyard. And in light of climate chaos, you want a resilient ecosystem that can deal with heat spikes or droughts or, too much rain. And it's that resilient agro-ecosystem that then allows you to get grapes that are harvested that give you the potential to make really interesting wines that reflect their place.
It looks like Arnaud wants to say something at this point.
Well, as it comes to give more life to the soil, I always have something to say. No, but it's totally right what Jamie just said. To bring more activity for the plant to be able to assimilate the nutrients. That's exactly the challenge what we try to do, because we know that in the soil we'll get in the fruit, then in the wine, what is working in the soil. So that's the whole process that we need to give a gear, I would say.
Okay, so we achieve better resilience of the plant and ultimately better fruit. And better fruit makes better wine.
Absolutely. More life.
Tamlin, your go.
I mean, it's difficult to say much more than Jamie and Arnaud. I couldn't agree more that it all comes back down to the soil when we're talking about sustainability and sustaining freshness. Francois said that the most important thing in the Loire was terroir, and you can't change terroir, but you can care for it. You can protect it, and that is protecting your soil. So we've almost got to take, from a sustainability point of view, both for the planet, but also to sustain and maintain these particular identities and terroirs. We have to farm our soils, and Jamie's right in that there's no template, there's no recipe, except that there's one thing. If we all look after the life of our soils and invest in the life, wherever you are, invest in the life of your soil. I've spoken to winemakers in the Rhone, in Oregon, in Burgundy, in Champagne, and all of them have said the one thing they're struggling with is making sure that acids are not too low and alcohols are not too high. And yes, there's picking date and canopy management. But over and over and over, I've heard them say that once they started looking after their soils, the vines kind of came into a natural balance. Their ripening was slower. The sugars rose a little slower. The grapes held their acidity. So, at the moment, a lot of this is just anecdotal, but I'm hearing so many people giving me the same stories. So I think from a sustainability point of view, yes, the soils, but then the other thing is we've all got to stop burning fossil fuels. Let's make sure the climate doesn't change too much. So, from another point of view, I guess the one thing that we can do is look at our fossil fuel consumption.
Yes, that's a vast debate, and I don't think you've got quite enough time to tackle this one. François, from your point of view, I mean, you're at the forefront of the implementation of this charter. I'm sure you've been very instrumental in putting it together as well. So what is your experience, and do you have examples of what Tamlin describes of a vineyard which you've seen changing, evolving, and the wine changing as a result?
Of course, I saw a lot of vineyards changing like that by a better preservation of the soil. And what everyone said for me is very important. When we spoke about minerality, for me, minerality is like when you take directly a stone in your mouth and you feel something special. When you have a lot of life in your soil, microorganisms are able to keep some nutrients that the vine can't directly take. When they die, they give it to the vine, and the vine can assimilate them. So you can feel the soil, you can feel the stones of the soil directly in the wines because of the life of the soil. So it's very important, and we observe it each time when grower decide to change his way of working.
And when a wine grower decides to change his way of working, how long does it take before you can see the benefit? Because that's another thing. It's all very well to talk about change, but if it's going to take 10 years, 20 years, it can be quite discouraging for some people.
It's very progressive. The first and second year, we observe things. And each year it's better and better. And after 10 years, we see the improvement go on.
And the improvement is then stable.
Yeah.
Jamie, in your experience, when you look at all the vineyards that you've explored and all the vineyards that have developed new form of viticulture, more protective of the soil, regenerative, whatever, do you feel that there is a different approach between the new world and the old world?
I think now people are well travelled. There's a lot of mixing, so I think that the approaches are, more or less along the same sorts of lines. Obviously, you're dealing with, many different challenges, different terroirs, different. But I think that generally speaking, that these conversations are taking place around the wine world at the moment now. I think the exception might be certain parts of California where I think that the impression I get is that there's a lot of people that are quite resistant to regenerative approaches. They like their dust mulching, they like their herbicides, they like their irrigation. It's a challenge, And obviously, what we've got to think of here is it's all very well for us to talk about viticultural changes that are taking place in small, isolated vineyards that produce very expensive wine. The real changes that need to be made are in the larger vineyards that are used to make inexpensive wine, because that's the vast majority of the vineyard area around the world. And so this is fine. We can talk about biodynamics, but this is going to be 1% of the world's vineyards that maybe potentially could adopt that sort of practice. But when it comes to regenerative approaches, there's a low barrier to entry. And I think then you can start to see people making a change, whatever segment of the market they're playing in. And I think to see the changes on large scale, large vineyards, I think is the most important thing, because that's what's going to make a difference environmentally.
Mm. Henri, in your experience, are the consumers aware of the changes happening in the vineyards? I mean, surely they must be aware of the benefits to them, but how are they perceiving the work that's being done? Is there an awareness at all? And is there a difference between, you think, British consumers and French consumers?
It's very difficult to say, because there are kind of like, I would say, probably three trends. You've got the people who don't want any innovation. They like the wine the way it's been made before, and they don't care, and they don't believe in kind of like, organic, biodynamic, sustainable. They don't care. Some people are like that. And they will be even kind of like really reactive to that, because they think it's just kind of like marketing.
Yeah.
You've got some people who are interested, because the trend today is kind of like to know where your products are coming from, and how they are grown, and how they are made. So people, they like to have a little bit more information about the production side. Mm-hmm. That said, they don't really care in going really too far. The general consumer, the difference between bio, biodynamic, blah, blah, all of that, they don't really care. The only thing they like to know is that it's being grown sensibly. Yes, because it's kind of like, it's the way of thinking. And then the danger almost is coming from the people who are just all the way and would not try anything else, and with that new trend of no sulfur. Mm-hmm. Which is, some people are making some very, very nice no sulfur wines. Some people are also making some very bad wines, and there is a small part of the consumers that, even if the wine is bad, they will just kind of like be adamant that it's the way it is to go. And that is, I think, very dangerous, because first, some people might believe it's the way forward. So that means we'll have more bad wine, which is not very interesting. And also the people who don't really trust in it, or the people, the other two trends, which is the vast majority, will kind of like, end up believing that being sensible is not making good wines. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
That's the problem, I think. That's where we are. The trend seems to be going, because definitely if you try some wine that have been marketed by, you know, just by the fact that they've got no chemicals, no sulfur or whatever, and the wine is tasting bad. The wine is tasting bad. So some people might be inclined to think that more natural wines are not good.
Yeah.
And that's dangerous.
So maybe we should have a new label that says sensibly grown.
No, I think no. More simply than that, we should. It should be forbidden to make bad wine. I mean, you know, it's forbidden to build dangerous cars. It's forbidden to build a house on soil that is not, you know, suitable for building a house. Then you should stop people making bad wine. I think that's terrible. They should not be able to use the name wine. You know, I mean, they should use kind of like marketed stuff or whatever. I don't know.
I think there's less and less bad wines nowadays. Anyway, we're getting away from our subject.
No. Well, yes. Well, yeah, I don't agree with you because because all of that for the general consumer is kind of like new trends.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And what you want to do is what is important is for the right kind of like objectives to be seen as good trends and
Yes.
not kind of like bad trends, because of, you know, we are professional. That's our business. We understand all of that, but most of the people, they don't understand. You know, they are lost in all of that.
Yes.
And it's a little bit dangerous, I think.
The labels, I think the multiplicity of label is
Yeah,
quite
yeah.
confusing.
Yes,
definitely.
absolutely. Yes. Mm-hmm.
So to come back to something quite simple, we're going to taste the Quincy now. So Quincy is quite popular in the UK, probably because of its easily pronounceable name. Is that your perception as well? I mean, as you know, in the UK it's called Quincy, but
That's right.
whatever. So would you say that this is definitely a plus for the for the consumer, be it French or British, to have a simple pronounceable name?
Yes, I mean, even if you pronounce it your own way, it's definitely something that people will remember. I mean, for them, Quincy is Quincy, it's Queens, it's simple, it's easy to remember. So that's definitely an advantage, especially as it's kind of like not a new appellation, but it's kind of like a new, you know, wine coming in force onto the market, because the other wines are getting more expensive and are more and more in demand. So people are moving slowly west. In their choice. I think as well what is quite interesting in this wine is that it's to me, maybe I'm making a mistake, but it's a little bit more approachable as well. It's a little bit more fruit driven than the Sancerre and the Puys, and it makes people an easier approach wine, easier to approach and to appreciate those wines for the consumer that is starting to drink wine.
I think that's a very interesting point, because I felt also that this Quincy was very approachable. Tamlin, how would you describe this wine, and how do you think it compares with the other two?
Particularly, I agree with Henri in that there is more fruit, and what I found interesting about this is that the acidity to me had a sweetness. So the acidity tasted ripe, almost like oranges, rather than the more mineral, perhaps tighter, more nervous tension and the acidity of like the Puy Fumé and even the Giennois. So for me, this wine is more circular in the way that it sits in your mouth. It starts in the middle and it moves out like a ripple. So it's gentler in the way. So I think if you were introducing someone to the Loire, a new wine drinker, perhaps you would start with a Quincy rather than, say, a Puy Fumé or something like that. It's not as challenging. But it's got a lovely warmth to it, and by that I don't mean alcoholic warmth. It's got lovely spice, and yeah, it's more circular. That is
So
how
spicy, approachable.
Yeah, and that lovely oranges, clementine kind of flavor. So yeah.
Excellent. Jamie, how would you describe this wine?
I think there's a delicacy, certainly, and it's quite sharply focused. It's like when you're focusing an old-fashioned camera and you're kind of going, you're going towards focus. As you taste it, you start off a little bit blurry, then you focus it. Ah, yes. So it resolves itself really nicely in the mouth. So I think, yeah, it's that, you kind of hunt around for the focus, but then you get it, and then you get this sort of quite precise taut sort of finish to it. I think it's a really good wine.
Henri, what did you think about that wine?
But as I said, I think it's more fruit driven. I think it's rounder. You haven't got that kind of like I don't know what I really call minerality. That kind of like a bit sharper edge to the wine. I think for what the basic consumer would call it, they will call it sweeter. Because it's softer, rounder, more fruity, a little bit riper fruit maybe as well. So. Yeah, definitely it makes a very nice drinking, easy, approachable, not in the price, but approachable in the taste, the type of wine.
So it's approachable, but it's still crisp and fresh. So would you say, François, that it's nature or nurture?
We have a French expression we call les deux mon capitaine. If you can translate
That's a good answer.
Okay. The structure of this wine is really different from the other ones, and it's really due to the soil. The soil is really different. Quincy have another climate. It's unfortunately for them, they are a lot more sensitive to frost. But the soil is really different too. The first wines was on a chalky soil with a lot of clay, and the clay gives this structure we had on the first wines. And here the soil is different and permit to have more floral aromas, and the structure is really different. So it comes mostly from the terroir, from the trees, but it comes too from the way of managing, and the date of picking is really different because of that.
Okay. So lots of nature, a little bit of nurture.
Of course, yes.
So I think we should try the Sancerre now. I mean, Sancerre is one of the best known wine in the world. It's a flag bearer for Centre-Loire wines. I think it's fair to say it's the best well known. There's, if you read the British papers, there's countless jokes about Sancerre as sincere, or Sancerre as almost a synonym for a white wine. I've seen that quite a lot. Even people who probably don't drink much Sancerre use the word in the same way that they say bolly for a sparkling wine. So it's almost victim of its own success, I would say, up to a point. How would you describe this wine, Arnaud, since it's one of yours?
Well, it's always difficult to speak of ourselves, but if
of your own babies.
Exactly, if I may give a bit of information first on this wine. It comes from a single vineyard which is situated in the south of the appellation, very close to the village Vinon. It's extremely clay, and we have a high level of high percentage of limestone. It's a vineyard which is facing southeast, so we have a morning sun, which is good, of course, to have a longer ripeness season, which offer an interesting complexity. So why we wanted to elaborate separately this block? Because we believe that it's a wonderful example, this block, of what can express a Sauvignon Blanc from Sancerre on clay and chalky.
Okay.
So in the nose, for example, straight away, to me, we have both the fruitiness and the minerality at the same time. And that's what I suppose consumers expect from a Sancerre. Knowing that this wine has been fermented in barrels, about 30%, in 600 liters barrels. And we decided to do that in 2020 because the barrel at one stage would help to enhance the acidity.
Yes.
That's what we were looking for. So we think sometimes that the barrel would probably give more roundness and a little bit sweet character. But we think that if it's a little bit, it is the opposite. it helps to enhance minerality and also the minerality.
Okay. So, Jamie, would that wine be what you expect of a Sancerre?
It's kind of like a Sancerre plus, right? So it's not an average Sancerre. This is something that's got concentration. It's got a little bit of structure even, and it's got a really nice presence in the mouth. It's got edges as well. I like that. There's a little green there, a nice green touch, but those edges I think really help because you're seeing something that's kind of young, that looks like it's got potential to develop. This is an age-worthy wine, and I don't think people have often tried enough old Sancerre to realize that actually Sauvignon can age really beautifully. People think it's an ephemeral wine, but this has got structure and presence. So I think, is it typical? No, it's Sancerre plus. It's a very high-end Sancerre that's got a lot of personality.
Thank you.
I really appreciate.
Henri,
Yes.
what did you think about that Sancerre?
I think it's beautiful. I mean, it's really what I would expect from a wine from Sancerre. Bearing in mind that in the on-trade, the focus on price is not as sensitive as in the off-trade. Yes. So if you take a Sancerre on your list, for example, it's really to have something that will represent the appellation. Alors, maybe not at its best because then that will be really expensive, but then really shows the character. If you take a Sancerre that tastes like a Pouilly, that tastes like a Mentou, then there's no point. Yeah. Well, I believe in the off-trade it will be more kind of like the retail price that will be important, and then trying to get an appellation that sells by its name, is a different focus.
Yeah.
But I think for me that is a fantastic Sancerre. It shows what I was saying earlier on. It shows the importance, and it shows the character of the specific terroir of Sancerre. A fruity Sancerre, anybody in the area can make a wine fruity, tasting like a fruity Sancerre. Not everybody in the area can make that. You see what I mean? They can't make it in Pouilly, they can't make it in Mentou or in Quincy or whatever. So that's why I think this one is really nice.
So that's a unique wine.
It's not not a unique wine. It's a Sancerre. It's not a unique Sancerre.
Okay.
Voilà, you know what I mean. I mean, other people will do that, but it's a Sancerre which you can't make outside of the appellation. Well,
Thank you. What would you say, Tamlin?
Every now and then you taste a wine that just gives you that tingle at the back of your spine, and this is one of those. It's an incredibly complex wine. There's so much to it, and what I found when I was tasting it back in the UK is that over a few days, every time I poured it in a glass, I found something else. But I suppose the first thing is that it's one of those yin-yang wines where you keep writing and yet. So it has this incredible power, but it also has this crystalline, almost fragility. It's power, but it's not dominating. It's got a richness of fruit, but there's this cold, bracing, stony linearity. It's got that kind of laminar flow of a river, and yet you also get a sense of water falling over rocks. It's got, in many ways, it reminded me of a mountain river with that clarity, the purity, the persistence, the power, but also with that kind of delicate beauty and the way that it just moves and moves and moves in your mouth. It's a beautiful wine.
So this wine, I think, was probably very apt as the last wine of the tasting, because this is the one that shows the importance of terroir best. We have come to the conclusion, and I think I will leave that to you, Francois, that the terroir of Centre-Loire wines is absolutely key in their future and in retaining the crispness and the freshness that make them quite unique. Could you just summarize for us once more how you think wines of the Centre-Loire will remain crisp and fresh in the future, and what you're working on to ensure that is the case?
We don't know the future, and to be honest, we are very afraid of what can happen. But when we taste such a wine, I totally agree with everything that was said around the table. It's exactly what we want to do. We want to produce that sort of wine where everything is at its place, and even with very hot weather, we can keep this freshness that is very, very present in the wine. And we are sure that our terroir, all vines, will permit us to keep it a long time, still a long time. We hope.
Excellent. I think that's a very fitting conclusion. It remains for me to thank you for taking part in this roundtable and to thank the BVC for organizing it. Enjoy the rest of the exhibition.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.